back to the Psychotic Break. I'm Maddie.
And I'm Kimmy. And today we are going to be psychoanalyzing the characters from the beloved Nickelodeon show SpongeBob.
Yes, we are adding to our TV show analysis series. And I couldn't think of the word. And we are hitting a fan favorite. Whether you are 20, 18, 50, you've probably seen or heard of SpongeBob, and there's a lot to unpack. Here's something I would like to share with you guys. It might be a little controversial, it might ruin your childhood. Sorry, but I firmly believe, and I'm not the only one, there is a general consensus that all of the characters from SpongeBob are created from the idea of one specific mental illness or disorder. We will be psychoanalyzing them from that lens, saying which character represents this disorder, and it's about to get real heated and real interesting.
I'm not sure if I can completely agree with that, only because it's hard to not watch the show because there are so many characters and look at them from the perspective of there are some weird ones, and then you have the almost normal ones. Like, I always perceived Sandy Cheeks as relatively normal, but according to this, it's not. And whenever I hear the theory of TV shows with possible mental disorders, the one that always comes to mind is Winnie the Pooh for me.
Hmm.
So, another episode, because that one makes a lot of sense. Example, Eeyore confidently depression. That guy is not okay.
Arguably, Squidward's not okay.
He is the a little more vocal version of our Eeyore.
Hmm. All right. Well, we'll save that for the actual analysis. But I remember I had this idea planted in my head in sophomore year of high school. I had a professor who, or not a professor, a teacher who was really weird. I don't know if you had Mr. Actually, I shouldn't say his name. So this guy was just really odd. Made me uncomfortable. Pretty good teacher. That's all I'll say about his character. But we were in the class, we were talking about a SpongeBob episode, and then he was like, "Did you know that SpongeBob is a commentary on mental illness?" And then we all started to think, maybe he's right.
Oh, I'm not sure why that would have come up, but to some degree, I will entertain the idea as we go through this, and then maybe I'll make my decision at the end.
All right, and feel free to argue your point here.
Oh man.
We are going to start with the nefarious SpongeBob SquarePants. If you couldn't guess, he is the main character of SpongeBob. He is a bright and bubbly yellow sponge.
Sponge.
He actually doesn't make a whole lot of sense being in the show. They're playing it off of like sea sponge, but he really is just like a regular kitchen sponge in the sea. And I would say that he represents ADHD because he is just kind of all over the place. He has so many different tasks. He doesn't seem to focus on one thing for very long. Sorry if you hear a siren. Give me 1 second. Hope they're okay. Hope hope that the ambulance gets there quickly. Anyways, before I was rudely interrupted. I'm kidding. Genuinely hope they're okay. So SpongeBob is just kind of all over the place. People would say he's a little dim, and I will draw on one specific episode, season 2, episode 32A, Procrastination. This was an episode where SpongeBob had to write an essay for his boating school class. And he just couldn't sit down and start writing. He would be thinking about so many things. He would call his friends, he would hallucinate, just all over the place. And I would say that's a very good example of ADHD.
Yeah, there is honestly no other way to describe him. I think my only issue when it comes to putting SpongeBob with any disorder is that, other than where we'll get with Patrick, is SpongeBob is dumb. We can openly say the guy is dumb. And if we went with the theory that each of them had their own disorder, I would hate to put the kind of connection between ADHD and someone being dumb. Obviously, you can be separately dumb with ADHD, or you could be smart with ADHD, or normal with ADHD. It's a spectrum, but it could easily get skewed that a dumb person is someone with ADHD because of how SpongeBob is portrayed 24/7. For all we know, if we gave him Adderall, he would sit down and could write the best driving paper that get him passed finally.
Right. And I will say the only reason he completed that paper was he wrote about all of the crazy things that he did instead of writing the paper. And he basically was like, oh, here's what you should not do at a red light. You shouldn't call your friend. You shouldn't eat dinner. You shouldn't pet your pet snail. You know, all of the weird things that he did. And yeah, I'm just thinking about that episode. It's just such a funny episode. SpongeBob, great show. Uh, I do want to touch on that point you just made about connecting dumb and ADHD. There's no comparison there. And I think that's why the creators of SpongeBob did a little bit of a controversial thing. Whether they meant to base the characters off of mental disorders and be open about that or not, people are inevitably going to make those connections. And I do want to answer this question more towards the end, but is it wrong for them to be making these commentaries? Is it wrong for them to be presenting this show in a comedic format because it might just be poking fun at all of these different characteristics? We don't have to answer that right now, but I think that's a good thing to keep in our mind as we continue to psychoanalyze.
I'm starting to think of an answer, but I'm going to put it on the back burner as we enter another controversial character. Our one of at least my favorites over SpongeBob is Patrick Star. And
Yes.
really for that one meme of almost the BDSM kind of Beyonce-esque outfit with the heels.
And the tights.
Oh, and the tights. And the tights indeed. um there's he there's no way of putting it that sums it better. He has an intellectual disability. He lives under a rock. That is the joke of it. He will never rise to the surface. He will never understand because he cannot understand possible social cues. He's as dumb as a rock. He has no sustenance. He's just dense. I hate to attack him because he's honestly so great, but he is most likely representing mental disability.
Right. And the term that you could use, the common term that is okay to use, is intellectual disability. For any of those who don't really understand what that means, the previous name is something you've probably heard one point or another: mental retardation. We don't use that anymore because it's just got such a heavily negative connotation to it. So we'll leave it at intellectual disability. And you could look at him every single episode. He is the one character that is pretty consistent throughout all of the episodes. I think there was one episode where he was just, maybe he got hit in the head, but he was just extremely smart and he was wearing a lab coat and it was just really funny. Patrick is such a great character, and maybe if we are looking at it from the lens that he has to represent this disorder, that you can be so much more even if you have a disorder. even if you are characterized as dim-witted, you are still you're so full of life and so entertaining. And Patrick is extremely loyal. He's always by SpongeBob's side and he's always there to support him and have a good time. And he's genuinely just one of the best characters.
As you were saying that, although we did argue that SpongeBob could be slightly misinterpreted, at least with Patrick, if we are assuming he has an intellectual disability, he's proving that not only is he loyal, he's able to live on his own because the stereotype is unfortunately that those with intellectual disabilities cannot function on their own, and he's Patrick lives an entire life separate of SpongeBob. Sometimes he's not even that evident in a show, and he has his own house. He does his own things. He's able to pay for this house for some reason. Who
It is.
knows? But he's doing it.
Mhm. He is. And one last point before we move on to Squidward is he is a starfish. Starfish, I believe, have a very small brain, if or no intelligence at all. So if we don't really want to think of him as representing someone who has a mental illness, you could just look at him as he's as dumb as a starfish.
That
It's as much as you can expect.
was a great summary, yeah.
All right, I have a doozy. Squidward tentacles.
Oh.
There's a lot wrong with this poor man, squid character, whatever you want to call him. The most obvious mental disability, mental problem, struggle that he has is depression. He is very low energy. He gets very antisocial and obviously hates SpongeBob sometimes. Most of the time, actually. SpongeBob and Patrick. It's pretty funny that he lives in between both of them. And he has very few joys in life. He does have his clarinet, he does have his painting, but you don't really see him happy very often unless he's causing other people pain, which is very
Oh.
unfortunate. And there's definitely an aspect of narcissism because he is all about his clarinet playing, even though it's trash. He is all about his paintings, which are all of him. It's a lot. I will say that although there is a lot wrong with him, most people will agree with me on this one, especially people going into their 20s and 30s, you are relating to Squidward more and more as you grow older. That's not to say that adults are depressed. Have been arguments towards that, but he's very real. He embraces his reality. He goes to work every day. He pays the bills. He makes time for his few interests. And he is kind of just dragged through life, which is something I have a problem with because I don't think anyone should live their life that way. But it's a pretty good representation of how the average adult goes through life. Adulting's hard, and Squidward Tentacles is the perfect representation of what can go wrong.
Yeah, I'm honestly, as you said that, he is literally a teenager off the cusp of being a teenager, because I still describe myself as a teenager despite technically having the word teen at the end of my age. But I fear teenagers. They cause me anxiety. They make me sad about myself because of jealousy. But it's the perfect scenario. You're walking down the street and you see a bunch of e-girls, e-boys, all of the range of the E, and they're gonna pass you, and you freak the hell out and you run across the street because you don't want anything to do with them because you're scared of the younger generation. And I don't know if SpongeBob is younger than Squidward, but it's that same feeling of being an adult scared of almost the immature, or at least maybe the cooler. I'm not sure where I'm at in life.
Wow, that's a really interesting point. I never thought that Squidward's discomfort slash negativity towards SpongeBob could be related to maturity level. I just assumed that SpongeBob was annoying, so he doesn't want anything to do with him. But it could be that he's younger. I know that I am biased towards people with age. I tend to vibe better with people my age or much older. I don't like that aspect about me, and I am working to accept people younger than me, but there's just that air of lack of respect simply because you haven't had the life experience that I have had or that the average person my age has had. I have trouble relating to high schoolers, anyone younger than that, and it's just simply because they haven't lived those experiences and learned those lessons. So maybe SpongeBob is coming into this environment bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, you know, representing the 20-year-old, and perhaps Squidward's in his late 30s and he's just like, "Oh, you wait, you won't be smiling in a few years from now."
I don't know if there's an episode because I haven't watched the show in a hot minute. I have the memory of like full length episodes, but then there are so many episodes. But
Mhm.
is there ever an episode of Squidward's backstory? Because I'd love to know if this is really just an age thing where he cannot, as you said, vibe with the younger generation. Was he once, I'm not going to use the term normal, but was he once happy?
I don't know. No episode is coming to mind. The only episode that came to mind for Squidward was the SB-129 episode, which was an episode about him going to the future and there being clones of SpongeBob, and he literally dropped to the ground and was chanting future but in complete terror. I actually think that's a representation of a panic attack, which is super interesting. They made it comedic for the show, but
It's
props to the show.
concerning.
It is concerning, but props to the show writers for stepping into that territory. Showing what happens when someone completely breaks down is a controversial task for
It's
children.
and to not make it depressing because any other time you'd watch it, you'd definitely relate to them in terms of wanting to just cry in a street.
Hmm. Oh my gosh. Well, I don't know about the age thing, but we might want to move on to our next character.
Okay. Technically a reoccurring character, but I'd say Sandy Cheeks isn't as common as I remember her being. She doesn't appear very often. And uh, I'm not a great, like, not a huge fan of her, but it could be said that she has confident mood swings. She has some form of a personality disorder, which is a very under researched disorder. There are so many options within there. So, very loose with it as to what she may specifically have, but she confidently has mood swings. And that is seen every time she basically gets mad at Patrick or SpongeBob because when I think of her, I always see her as almost like Squidward in terms of being mature and on her own, doing the thing. She lives a completely separate life that you don't really see very often. She goes to the surface, she goes back under. She's very well rounded, but it might be another stage. I mean, another example of the maturity. It's when you're babysitting, you love kids in short spurts, but then they do that tiny thing and you want to just cuss at them. But you have to remember that they are kids, that's normal, and that's where Sandy might be at.
I see that. And for anyone, since personality disorder isn't really talked about, a lot of you may be thinking of the recent movie, it might have been like a 2018 movie called Split, where the character in that had so many different personalities. I think it was like a dozen or more, and just very distinct personalities that would take hold of a person. I'm not
Yeah.
saying that Sandy is like that. I would say that Sandy, if she does represent personality disorder, and I think she does, shows a much more toned down, realistic version where she does have those mood swings. She does seem like a different person, but arguably who doesn't at some point in their life. I've said multiple times, you don't want to be around me when I'm angry. It happens very rarely, but don't mess with that chick. I'm afraid of her. And I do want to touch on my favorite episode from SpongeBob, Survival of the Idiots. Ah, oh, just that name, just classic. It's from season 2, episode 29A, where Sandy's in hibernation. She is sleeping.
Oh, no, not this
The
one.
inside of her like tank home incubation area is snowing, which is weird. And SpongeBob and Patrick come to visit her and notice that she's hibernating, and then they're like, "Oh, let's just stick around and just be around, play, fuck around, basically." And she was dreaming about two cowboys, Dirty Dan and Pinhead Larry, and they went outside into the snow and started pretending to be Dirty Dan and Pinhead Larry. And just the most iconic line ever, I'm Dirty Dan. No, I'm Dirty Dan. Just going back and forth, whacking each other with shapes that they made from snow. Hilarious. Anyways, she wakes up and she is angry. She is just dysmorphic. She's huge, like ready to kill someone. And she even grabs Patrick and rips off part of his head, which is, graphic, but they did make it funny. And then he throws him across the way. And you are just so shocked that hibernation could do this to someone. And I think that's a very smart way to show personality disorder to children who just couldn't possibly understand that.
Yeah. There. I don't know if I say she has like dissociative identity disorder, but I also I keep forgetting that this is a kids show. They can play around because I don't think squirrels actually even hibernate. If we're gonna be honest, I've seen squirrels during the winter, but I'm gonna roll with it because I'm not gonna question it too much. I'm gonna go back into my child brain and surface level it.
Mhm. Well, I will say I really like Sandy. You're right, she is completely independent and she doesn't take anyone's shit. She will do whatever it takes. Like, she will fight a huge worm, if you know what episode I'm talking about. And she does go to the surface, and she did decide to go down to create this life for herself. She's also a scientist. As, two women in science, we can appreciate that. That's freaking cool.
It's good representation as a child because if you know anything about the show, she's one of the few female characters. She's very intelligent, and I'm not going to degrade the other one, like the other females on the show, but we'll get to why she may be considered better. She is going to be our Phoebe.
Hey, Phoebe! Oh my gosh, that's perfect. Please watch our Friends and TV show analysis. That one's doing really well. You might have already seen it.
You'll get the reference. This is all just suggesting.
Right. Next, we have Mr. Krabs, first name Eugene. And he obviously loves money.
Oh, yeah.
I would say he loves money a little bit more than his daughter. And he classifies as OCD. He is very obsessive and compulsive, and that's really seen through his obsession with money.
Yeah, he's. I know the example they gave in Screen Rant, or was it, oh, it may have been something else, where they used an example of Mr. Krabs where he sold SpongeBob for more money, even though it was just a few cents. And if that doesn't describe him more than that, plus he's very, if you look at his office, it's very neat. And if it isn't neat, it's because it's full of money.
Mhm.
He's always like checking the safe to make sure it's always like perfect. There's always money in it. And that is the stereotype of OCD when you, and it's obviously not true. We're not supporting that, but it's also a kids show, and if this is their underlying thing, they're not going to do too much psycho kind of like psychology of the disorders to know that that's not true. But it's the example of a person with OCD that you see in the media where they have to flick a light switch 5 times. That's him with his what is, like a bank, like the safe. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and to contrast Mr. Krabs, let's look at Plankton.
Oh, I kind
By
of
the way,
like LinkedIn.
I found this out while doing research. Apparently, Plankton, his first and middle name, well, his full name is Sheldon James Plankton. I knew the first, I'm embarrassed to say that I knew the first and last names of every single character except Plankton. Someone please tell me which episode we find out his name, because I was just blown away. I was just like, how is his name Sheldon? How did I miss that?
Surprisingly, I knew the Sheldon. I didn't know the James. I don't know if I necessarily like such a common name next to Sheldon Plankton.
The
Oh,
writers were creative. I'll give them that.
that's for sure. To think of this tiny little, I guess he's a plankton. I don't even know what a plankton is, but this tiny little man with his like 3 strands of hair is the arch nemesis of the entire show, who arguably has most likely antisocial personality disorder. Also seen as someone with like a sociopathic tendency or a psychopath. A little extreme, but he has no empathy. He can force charisma. He keeps his wife relatively, even though she is fake. But he he's got I there's not much going for him because he isn't able to fake characteristics of most people. That's why he's so hated, and he only really cares about himself.
He's definitely selfish. I don't know if I'd say narcissistic. I would very much agree with antisocial personality because he stays inside all day plotting to get the secret formula. And I didn't even think about the fact that he doesn't have empathy and could very well have characteristics of I'm blanking on the word.
Psychopath?
The psychopath. I didn't even think about psychopath, but I could definitely see that in terms of him putting himself first, not having that empathy. I'm thinking about that episode where he creates a Mr. Krabs robot and SpongeBob can't tell the difference between the two of them. The fact that he was able to pull that off was amazing. He understands the other character, but he's willing to just manipulate that, which could be seen as sociopath.
I was picturing the chum bucket hats where they were remote controlled or whatever. You don't do
Mm,
that. I would never think to do that because I would not want that power. That's not a thing that I crave.
hmm Oh man. Oh, plankton. I think plankton's a type of shrimp. No wonder he's so small.
Oh, but he literally looks like a shrimp that would be in a sewer because he's black and he lives in the chum bucket.
Yeah, and he has one eye. What's that about?
Maybe he is a sewer dweller and he's like radioactive and that's why he only has the one eye because he's
I don't know.
experimental.
Because now I'm thinking maybe plankton's not a shrimp. Maybe it's a bacteria. He definitely looks like a bacteria.
Okay. Well, if you want to go to Karen, I'm going to look up what the plankton is.
Okay. I don't have a whole lot to say about Karen. I mean, Karen is an underwater robot that was created by Plankton. It is surprising, though, that she is able to call him out, because you would assume that if you're creating the robot, this is a projection of you. I'm surprised that they're not more similar. So maybe an aspect of Plankton knew he had to be checked. So the fact that I don't know if they're husband and wife, girlfriend and boyfriend, it's weird to think about, but they're a couple, and it's just so funny to see their dynamic.
Okay, first, he is a microorganism, so really
Mm.
smart on that one. And Karen, I think this may be part of his like whole psychopath tendency where he knows what a normal person, not normal, but not a person with
Yeah.
antisocial personality disorder,
Mhm.
would behave. They have human tendencies. And within Karen, I'm seeing her as the first proper um artificial intelligence where she is able to mimic human actions and stuff and behaviors, which is why, as you said, Karen does call out Plankton. She's always like, oh honey, your plan failed again. Like, okay bro, like I'm just here to write it out because there's nowhere else I can go.
Yeah, one more thing before we move on to Pearl is it's just so funny that Plankton keeps failing. We think of it as comedic, but if you're really looking at it, he is determined. There's nothing that can stop him. He will keep trying over and over again, and I would say that is a very good representation of drive and of making sure that you persevere. So it's nice that they have that in the show. Also, it wouldn't be a very good show if he just gave up.
Okay, you are very staticky on my end.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, like I hear everything you're saying, and I had a loose concept of the kind of flow, but you are
Mhm.
frozen.
Okay, well, I think it picked up my end. We'll just have to see how the recording is. I'll add in a snippet if it was weird. But let's talk about Pearl.
Okay. Pearl, sweet, sweet Pearl. She, I would argue, is possibly a narcissist in terms of she only cares about herself, and that could be argued because she gets so much neglect from her father that she's compensating. But I'd also say she may have body dysmorphia coming from the fact I believe she's like a cheerleader or something.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying all people that are part of cheer have body dysmorphia, but specifically Pearl is always unhappy with herself. There's always something going on, and she could just be very anxious about the world because she doesn't get support and has a very neglectful father.
And let's touch on the fact that Pearl is obviously adopted. I don't care what Mr. Krabs tells her, I don't care what she believes. She's a whale. Her name is Pearl Krabs, but she's a whale. And maybe that's also a comment on the body dysmorphia. She is supposed to be a crab,
Yeah.
and she's not. She doesn't look like one. She doesn't. I don't think she feels like one. It's kind of like Kung Fu Panda, where Po, the main character who's a panda, his dad is a goose. I'm pretty sure that her body dysmorphia comes from the unconscious discontent with the uh juxtaposition. The It just doesn't make sense for her really to be the daughter of a crab.
That was an idea I've never thought of, but makes complete sense and solves her entire issues in my mind, at least with herself, where maybe we just she needs to accept the fact of who she is, and it's almost with Poe in the third movie he finally meets all of the pandas. And she just needs to hang out with a bunch of whales. And
Yeah.
she'll feel a little bit better and connected and with her culture to assume that they all have cultures.
We're really going on a limb here.
I know these are all like such a stretch, but we're rolling with it.
Oh, yes. Next, we have Mrs. Poppy Puff, or just Mrs. Puff. And she's actually a really interesting character to me. I'm going to draw on the episode that sticks out to me, Doing Time. It was episode 45B in season 3, and she was in the car with SpongeBob doing his driving exam. She obviously has anxiety, especially around SpongeBob, because she was just, I think she hyperventilated at one point, and the way that she shows that she's anxious is she blows up because she's a pufferfish. And I just think that's a nice touch. So she clearly has anxiety, and he obviously does poorly. He fails, he crashes, flames, all bad, and she ends up going to jail for some reason. And in jail, she was fine, but SpongeBob kept showing up. He would show up in the beans of the chili pot. He would show up as a janitor, whatever. He would just keep showing up, and that caused her more anxiety. And then as the episode progresses, you notice that her reality is completely distorted. She is having these false memories and false realities of these scenarios where SpongeBob is continuously being in her life. And that is very characteristic of PTSD. SpongeBob caused this poor female PTSD, and she's just having all of these traumatic memories of her experiences with SpongeBob, and we don't see any of the other characters show that.
Yes. Answer is yes. Obviously, she definitely has PTSD. There's no other way around it. You do not picture someone in beans and puff up because of beans. But I watched a YouTube conspiracy on Mrs. Puff, and in it, they were touching on the idea, and this may explain why she has PTSD, and this may be a stretch. It's YouTube.
Mhm.
Have you watched this?
I know where you're going with this.
Hmm.
Continue.
Her name is actually not Mrs. Puff. She has lived a second life as another driving instructor in, oh, is it like Kelp City or whatever?
Probably.
Something like that. And the same thing happened where she had another version of SpongeBob and she ended up in jail. So she knows almost the signs of a bad driver that's going to lead her down the exact same path. And the key point to this was in the episode of Doing Time, the officer says, like, back again or something like that. And you don't say that unless you've been to jail before. And plus, there has been, I think, 2 episodes. One of them was SpongeBob cleaning out her house. And in a brief second, you can see an article from a newspaper from apparently a few years ago where it's a picture of most likely Mrs. Puff in her, oh, what is it called? The picture you take when you're going to jail.
Mugshot.
Her mugshot, yes. And it's of her, and it's, I forgot what the article title was, but it was something about Puff instructor causes like a crash or like something like that. A whole nother just SpongeBob PTSD episode from prior experience trauma.
All of those are great points. It's actually not where I thought you were going to go. What
No.
I was going to say was Mr. Puff is dead. Sorry to
Oh.
be but in one of the episodes, I think it was the episode where Mr. Krabs and Mrs. Puff start dating, he asked, "Oh, where's Mr. Puff?" And it cut to a very brief scene of a pufferfish on the wall of a bar. So
Oh.
obviously, he was fished, and who knows, maybe Mrs. Puff is scarred by that trauma. That's horrific. Of course, that's going to cause trauma. And whether you make the connection or not, it's so interesting to see how that trauma could have led to her PTSD. It could have even led to a life of crime. Maybe the woman had a psychotic break.
Oh, that was amazing. That was the first drop of it. Okay. I think both of those. Confidently, both of those. There's a different trauma that comes with at least the death of your partner. Because if that happened with her, I'm also seeing that she may have probably been in the trap with him and escaped. I'm doing a maybe finding Nemo scenario where you save your like partner by biting through the net or something.
Yeah, yeah.
And she saw him get fished out and put into a bag on the boat, and then she never saw him again and just knows that that's what happened to him.
Man, poor Mrs. Puff.
She's had a hard life.
She has. Well, on that note, I don't even think we really need to talk about Larry the Lobster. He's not even really a main character. He's not even a bad guy. I think you said that he was a dumb jock, if anything.
Yeah, I would say he's almost the most normal character with Sandy on the show. He's dumb, but he's really here for a good time. Just trying to be hot.
Nothing wrong with that. And if we had to call him something, maybe we could call him a narcissist, but that's it.
Yeah, he's doing his thing.
Yeah. Well, before we start wrapping up, what do you think now? Do you think that these characters are representative of mental disorders?
As someone who isn't a writer and doesn't know much about TV shows, I would think writing a character is very hard to develop a narrative for them. So to have this pre-existing thing that exists with a good amount of research to draw from to make characters could make the process easier, and it would help almost the story to go along with, because when you're writing, the concept is you're supposed to make them better almost. It's supposed to be that long developmental narrative. And by giving them all of these things, each of these characters their own disorder, that's a lot to work with in the long term. And at least keep them consistent. Because it's a TV show, it's for kids, it's supposed to go with your age group. You stop at a certain age almost, and the next generation gets to enjoy from their stance. They don't have to deal with that. Um, they're already in college, and now we're saying goodbye thing, like with
Mhm.
Phineas and Ferb almost.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. It definitely is easier to create a character when you have an archetype to follow. And I'm not saying that disorders make good archetypes. Maybe in the case of a comedic show that is very surface level, yes. But in reality, people are so much more than whatever struggles they're going with, whether it's classified as a disorder or not. So I personally believe that they did base the characters off of different mental illnesses, and I think they did a wonderful job of doing a very surface level representation of them to children. And maybe they didn't do that to provide awareness, but they definitely did a good job of showing that these characters are so much more than that one like very problematic thing about them.
Yeah, and I think your answer answered your own question where wasn't informational or insulting, and it could be argued it might be insulting, but this is going off the assumption that these characters are based off of these illnesses. But if not, then as adults watching the show, we are almost choosing to fall into this conspiracy and align them with these things. And then in that case, are we insulting the creators for assuming that these characters have this, this, and that, or what?
Yeah. Well, I think we should leave it there. And let's go ahead and flip a coin. Do a 1-minute summary of this episode.
Okay. How do you do this? Oh, I forgot to ask what you wanted.
I'll take heads.
Okay, let me flip again. Tails.
Ooh,
Wow, I was not
hit us
expecting
with
that.
it.
Okay, let me. Oh, I did it again. Okay, 1 minute. And we're ready. So today we talked about the TV show analysis if we went from the psychological perspective of SpongeBob. And from there, we decided that SpongeBob, the main character, most likely has ADHD. Patrick has an intellectual disability. Squidward has a list from possible narcissism, from all of his painting of himself, possible depression from immaturity and just being an adult, or constant anxiety that cripples him. Sandy Cheeks has possible dissociative identity disorder based off of her mood swings. Mr. Krabs obviously is a narcissist with OCD. Plankton, maybe a psychopath. Let's just put it there. Karen is a good one. We like Karen. And Pearl Krabs is definitely adopted and should accept the fact, and is suffering with possible identity problems. And that was my time.
Nice. Good job. Yeah, gosh, what an amazing character list.
That was a lot of people to cover.
Mm-hmm. Well, props to you and me. I think we did a pretty darn good job. And if you wonderful listeners disagree with us, you're wrong. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Please let us know if you disagree with us and turn it into a conversation. I will say that the moment our listeners start interacting with us, that is when we will come up with a name for you lovely people.
That seems fair. It's almost an ultimatum if they want to be a part of this.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
we kind of gotta get a feel for our listeners first before we name them.
true. But also interact with us, but interact with us by suggesting TV shows or movies as well, because we're only so creative. Just kidding. But sort of. It's very hard to pick a TV show. There are too many.
It is. So reach out to us. We are on Instagram. I highly recommend Instagram because I create bomb graphics every single week as reminders. Love to get some support, and it's also a good way for you guys to get reminders of our wonderful drops of these podcast episodes. We're on YouTube, so maybe you're looking at our faces right now. We got great expressions. So please interact with us. We love doing this podcast, and you guys make it just so much more wonderful.
Oh, I second all of that, but I don't know if you need me to repeat it for the people.
Well, we'll leave it there. This has been the Psychotic Break. I'm Maddie.
And I'm Kimmy.
Go watch SpongeBob.
What?
Bye.